The 2022 season for the Pittsburgh Steelers was a tale of two teams separated by a Week 9 bye week. Going into that Week 9 bye week, the Steelers sat at 2-6, but would finish the year 7-2 and were one good Joe Flacco Jets game away from making the playoffs. So how did they do carrying that momentum into the offseason, improving the team around the young guys that they have on the offensive side of the ball and the superstars that they have on the defensive side of the ball? And did they do enough? And what do those young guys have to do for the Steelers to break through and kind of reach that contender status that they haven't reached in probably about 6 to 7 years? So let's jump right into it on the offensive side of the ball. Let's start off with the biggest move the Steelers made this offseason. The biggest move, the biggest need, the biggest thing they had to do to break through that mold of being a fringe playoff team, and that was address the left tackle position in a big way. As this has been a big need for years, but they kind of stuck it out with Dan Moore. They let that experiment run, and it didn't work. And the Steelers traded up from pick 17 to 14 to jump the Jets and select left tackle Broderick Jones out of Georgia, who is a mover of men and is hyper athletic. I'm not an offensive line scout, but I like what I see when I watch him, and as a Steelers fan, this pick gives me so much hope for what is to come, especially considering the rest of the Steelers' offensive roster is full of young guys with massive potential that have massive talent. Broderick Jones gives hope at the position that has been hopeless for the last 2 years. Not to say Dan Moore was terrible, but he wasn't the guy. And Broderick Jones could definitely be the guy, as he is fantastic in open space. I know that was talked about during the draft coverage, but Matt Canada really likes those short throws. And if Broderick Jones can get freed up at the line of scrimmage, boom, there you go. He's freed up. He likes those short throws. There we go. Broderick Jones, run down the field and kill a man. And looking at the offensive line, especially the left side of the offensive line, the Steelers made one more addition at left guard, picking up Isaac Seumalo in free agency on a 3-year, $24 million contract with just under $7 million in guaranteed money, and the Steelers completing their offensive line purge that they've been on. We saw it last year when they picked up Mason Cole to be center and James Daniel to be right guard, and just kind of completing the picket fence, as Seumalo was a full-time starter for Philadelphia last season and committed 0 holding penalties, as he was a part of one of the best offensive lines in football last year. The concern that I saw when looking at Seumalo was that his injury history is not pretty. In back-to-back Septembers in 2020 and 2021, he was placed on the IR, which in my opinion definitely did not help his guaranteed money case. I think the Steelers very well recognized that and said, okay, we'll give just under $7 million in guaranteed money, so if you're injured, we can get out of this deal. In their offensive line purge, building the offensive line for Naji Harris, when we all know when Naji came in, they had no offensive line, and Kenny Pickett when it was shaky last year. It was shaky. It was consistently healthy, which was astonishing. It was the same group week in, week out. That was incredible, by the way. But they're replacing the left side of the offensive line with 2 upgrades, as the mid-round picks those few seasons in Kevin Dotson, Kendrick Green, and Dan Moore are seemingly out of the rotation. What do I think about these moves? It's about damn time they fix the offensive line. The Steelers have hope in these trenches battles, which is definitely what Naji Harris has been looking for, and for sure what Kenny Pickett has been looking for. So let's talk about the man himself, Kenny Pickett. One of the most important players on this Steelers team, definitely the most important player on the offensive side of the ball, because I think the Steelers have their franchise guy. I 1000% recognize the fact that his stat lines and box scores aren't pretty, but to see a box score and be like, this guy's trash, which I see some people do, is stupid. The numbers are not pretty. But pre-bye week and post-bye week were 2 entirely different seasons for Kenny Pickett after he came in, I want to say week 4 versus the Jets at halftime. But going from pre-bye week, where he threw 8 picks and committed 3 fumbles, to only throwing 1 pick and 1 fumble after the Week 9 bye week, while leading 2 game-winning drives in must-have-it games against the Raiders on Christmas Eve, which was one of the best games, I swear to God, and the Ravens, I want to say the very next week on Sunday Night Football. I put full trust in Kenny Pickett. I really do. Now for the Steelers to break through and for Kenny Pickett to avoid a sophomore slump and continue his progression the way that he did. We saw glimpses of this towards the end of last year, but I want to see more risks taken. I like how they stripped it all the way back. Matt Canada and the offensive staff stripped it back. They were committing too many turnovers. They stripped it back, gave him really easy passes. It wasn't pretty, but damn it, the offense scored just enough points to win the ball game. But we saw it in those last few games, though. Kenny Pickett was taking more shots. He was taking more chances. That up-the-seam throw to Connor Hayward. We saw him take more chances, and I want to see that trend continue going into next season as Kenny Pickett and the offensive staff continue to try to find that balance between throwing way too many picks but being risky and being way too conservative and not really giving him a chance to free-form play football. I'm not saying that should have happened in year 1. I don't think it should have. But in year 2, my expectation is to kind of see him play a more free-flowing game, and as the weapons are looking fantastic. Let's talk about the weapons and the expectations for those guys, as the passing game was not pretty last year. It did not result in a ton of yards, but the talent is for sure there, as I have the pass catchers, not the running backs, that's a separate category, but I have the pass catchers in 3 different categories, and the first one is the we know who they are, and in my opinion, that's Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, and Allen Robinson. The second category is big-time player potential in George Pickens and third-round pick Darnell Washington. And the third category has one man by himself, and that's Calvin Austin. Let's start with the we know who they are. And I want to preface this with that's not a negative thing. I feel like that has a negative connotation. That's not a negative thing. Saying we know who Deontay Johnson is not a negative thing, considering he was giving an $18 million per year extension, which I think is very worth it. But last season, stats-wise, was a down year, the same way every Steelers pass catcher had a down year last year. Deontay Johnson, though, was a little more interesting, considering his yards after catch numbers got cut in half, basically. It was not pretty. The thing I want to see from him is that consistency that we know him for. He'll drop a ball sometimes and get into his own head, which is kind of weird. But I want to see that consistency that we see from him and give him more chances for yards after catch while he still has that wide receiver 1 role, and he gets paid like it too right now. Deontay Johnson, definitely wide receiver 1 right now. Moving on to Pat Freiermuth, who is the ultimate Mr. Reliable. I love Pat Freiermuth. When the receivers are not open, Pat Freiermuth is always there. And the thing I want to see from him, he had a big-time drop-off in red zone threat from his rookie year with Big Ben to this past season with Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. I want to see that come back as Mr. Reliable continues to be Mr. Reliable. Moving on to the third guy, we have Allen Robinson. And trading for Allen Robinson by only moving down 17 spots in the 7th round, while kind of making the Rams pay for most of the big cap hit that Allen Robinson carries, as this is pretty much a 1-year rental for him. Pretty good. I feel like we know him as a veteran rotational receiver nowadays, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, considering you have Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Pat Freiermuth on the same exact lineup. There's nothing wrong with that. He is a good rotational receiver. We know who he is, and he should definitely contribute to the offense. So those are the we know who they are. Let's talk about the big-time player potential, and that's George Pickens and Darnell Washington. I love George Pickens. George Pickens is the man. His ability to bring the ball down in any situation is unreal. Watching Kenny Pickett highlights, which I know I had up during the time when I was talking about Kenny Pickett like 5 minutes ago, half of them are just lofting it up to George Pickens and him pulling it in because he's a maniac. He's a psycho. He's physical. I love every second of George Pickens. And my expectation for him this season is to take over that wide receiver 1 role. And he is the guy the Steelers should be trying to scheme open as much as possible as he enters year 2. Number 14 is always open. Pickett to Pickens is such a good combination that I'm so excited to continue to watch next season. Moving on over to Darnell Washington, 3rd round pick. And when I initially saw that the Steelers drafted a tight end, a pessimistic wave hit me. I was like, you gotta be shitting me. The Steelers drafted another tight end. They picked up Zach Gentry in the later rounds of 2019, picked up Pat Freiermuth in 2021, Connor Hayward during the 6th round of last year, and now another tight end is drafted, the 4th one in 4 years. I wasn't the happiest camper until I saw the name was Darnell Washington. Until I saw that Darnell Washington was even there in late round 3. That is nuts because guess what? This man is 6'7", 264 pounds, and runs a 4.64. He can essentially be another offensive lineman. And something I noticed pretty quickly is that little jet sweep that Matt Canada loved to run with Chase Claypool is going to be elevated to another level potentially with Darnell Washington. That is just what I saw. Obviously, he has an injury history. That's why he fell. This was a deep tight end class. If it was not as deep of a tight end class, even with that injury history, he's taken way earlier. But Darnell Washington is a physical freak and has that big-time player potential, as him and Pat Freiermuth are going to be a deadly duo. In the 3rd category, held by one man, if you're a Steelers fan, you could probably guess him. The 3rd category is fun stuff. Calvin Austin, the 3rd, is fun stuff. But we didn't get to see the fun stuff because Matt Canada does not like the fun stuff. Calvin Austin was a 4th round pick in the 2022 draft, and the man runs a 4.32 40. Unfortunately, was placed on IR before the season started, and when he was available to play, he had to stay on IR because Matt Canada did not know where to fit him in on the offense. Going into this season, figure out how to use the dude that runs a 4.32 40. This guy is fun stuff. But looking at the Steelers' overall pass catchers, and overall with the way the NFL is now, they're right on par. Every team has so many pass catchers, and in my opinion, the Steelers have 2 very reliable options in Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth. George Pickens, extremely reliable, but I want to see him take that wide receiver 1 spot. Another hyper-athletic tight end in Darnell Washington, and a man who runs a 4.32 alongside a veteran receiver in Allen Robinson. Kenny Pickett, who now has an offensive line, has weapons. Let's get over to the rushing game and just discuss the steps that I think need to be taken as the Steelers look to become that contender once again. As Naji Harris, entering his 3rd year, has had a lot of touches. He has for sure been a workhorse back for the Steelers, and I'm excited to see that role slow down for Naji, and hopefully he can take over as the pure power back guy. With the emergence and the rise of Jaylen Warren, who I think should be the pass-catching shifty back, the Tony Pollard-esque smaller guy who can shift around and burst out for a 20-yard run. And I think Warren should be the overall passing downs back, as I think he's a better receiving threat than Naji Harris. But Naji Harris, I think, should lean into that power back style, because I think he tries to be way too shifty sometimes. I think when Naji leans into his power back side, you can't stop him. You're not running over Naji Harris. And guess what? If you try to go low on him, he can still jump over you. I think he should lean into the power back side way more, especially with the offensive line getting their improvements. I believe if the Steelers' passing game takes leaps and bounds next year and the offensive line is very good, if you have a running back whose major threat is he can ice the game at any minute, you can run him 3 times and you'll get 10 yards and you'll run that clock down. Naji Harris, I think, should be that guy 1000%. While guess what? He's still ultra talented. I just don't want to see him get run into the ground the way he kind of has been the last 2 years. This is what the Steelers do. We saw it with Le'Veon Bell. They ran him into the damn ground, and Le'Veon didn't help out with the contract thing, but that's a different discussion. I want to see Naji lean into that workhorse vibe way more as Jaylen Warren kind of takes that big play potential away from Naji, and that's something I want to see from Jaylen Warren. I'm talking about that like it's fact. It's not fact yet. I want to see him grow in that role as I want to see Naji lean into that power back role. And I think if it works out with the offensive line and those two roles, this rushing attack is going to be deadly if the passing attack does not fully work out. And hey, if the passing attack works out and the rushing attack works out, you have a damn good offense. But will that happen with Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator? The shocker this offseason, at least very early this offseason, was that the Steelers stuck with offensive coordinator Matt Canada instead of honestly firing him during that Week 9 bye week. But they stripped it back completely. It ended up working out just enough for the defense, and they ended up scoring just enough points. Matt Canada is in the last year of his contract. I like the idea of Kenny Pickett not having two different offensive coordinators in the first 2 years of his career. And I understand the Steelers' whole coaching thing. They don't really fire coaches. 3 head coaches since 1969. Kind of a different discussion. But yeah, Matt Canada is still the man. I think he's on an extremely short lease, especially with such a young, talented offensive group there. I think the Steelers' offense didn't need a lot of work in the offseason through the draft and free agency. But where it did need work, they added guys. They added 3 players. 1, Broderick Jones, potential franchise left tackle. Let's fucking go. They added Isaac Seumalo at left guard, who is better than Kevin Dotson and just continues their offensive line purge on a great low-risk contract. And they added Allen Robinson, who also is kind of just a 1-year rental. His cap hit next year is massive, but his dead cap figure is $1 million. Yeah, you get him to move down 17 spots during the 7th round. I think off-season moves-wise, they did enough to set up this breakthrough. Now it's about how these guys are used, and I already laid out my opinions, but I'm not a football head coach that is in the building. But my opinions may be new to Matt Canada considering how terrible that offense was at the beginning of last season. Very short side rant. When Big Ben retired, I got the feeling like, okay, Matt Canada can kind of finally have his own offense. And then they got Mitchell Trubisky, they got Kenny Pickett, they opted for Trubisky in week 1s through 3. And we saw that same offense be used. The wave of disappointment and just pain that hit me was absurd. We saw the offense get less risky with Kenny Pickett, but I want to see more risks taken. I want to see Naji lean into the power back, Jaylen Warren lean into that Tony Pollard-esque pass-catching back role as the wide receivers continue to grow. Darnell Washington, be yourself, baby. Big-time player. So yeah, that's my offensive talk. Ultimately, do I think the Steelers did enough to break through on the offensive side of the ball? From an off-season perspective, yes. From an in-season perspective, obviously, TBD, but the players are 1000% there to make that happen. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball, the other 11. As there are 3 superstars. I said it during the intro. Cameron Hayward on the D-line, TJ Watt for the linebackers group, and Minkah Fitzpatrick for the secondary. You have a superstar at each level of defense. So when you have something like that and you have a great defense, the way that the Steelers have had for the past few years now, there's no need to spend a first-round pick on this major guy, especially when the offense is going through the phases that it is going through. So the Steelers' free agency money kind of had to be allocated towards that, as 5 starters did leave and a lot of the reinforcements were added during the free agency period. So I just want to talk about the patchwork that happened, because that's how I view this defense. I view this offseason as just patchwork. On the defensive side of the ball, in the secondary positions and the inside linebacker positions. So let's kind of look at the quote-unquote trades that happened as at the cornerback spot, they lost Cam Sutton in free agency and ended up cutting Akello Witherspoon after the draft, but would add Patrick Peterson, Joey Porter Jr., and Corey Trice. Let's talk about Pat Pete. The man who has been in the league forever, at least in my young eyes, had 5 interceptions and 15 PEDs last season, which both are his most since 2012, while being a full-time starter. He is a veteran, which is great for the next 2 guys in Joey Porter Jr. and Corey Trice. How the hell Joey Porter Jr. fell to the Steelers at 32 is nuts. Second team All-American corner that did not allow a single touchdown last season, and it kind of makes sense considering he has 34-inch arms. Joey Porter Jr. falling to the Steelers at 32, massive steal. I don't know how that happens, but those 2 guys are already kind of made up for. Losing Cam Sutton sucked. Congrats to the Lions, they got a good one. And in the 7th round for a lottery ticket pick, the Steelers also would select Corey Trice. And Corey Trice in round 7, considering he was mocked way higher than that, and this is the same with Darnell Washington, there's a lot of injury concerns for the guy. But the man has great size and great length, so hell yeah, spend your lottery ticket pick on this guy, as the cornerback room definitely needs some bolstering. I think Joey Porter Jr. does that very well with Patrick Peterson to be that veteran presence with him, as Patrick Peterson just basically had a career year last season, and Corey Trice hopefully fights his way up the depth chart we saw Trey Norwood do just a few years ago. Speaking of safeties, let's talk about the Steelers losing Terrell Edmunds in free agency to the Philadelphia Eagles and gaining Keanu Neal to replace him. So, is that fair? I think it is a step down talent-wise, but Keanu Neal is a versatile player, and with Trey Norwood entering year 3 and DeMonte Casey re-signing for 2 years, and he has that ability to step into that starting safety role, I'm not overly concerned about it. Terrell Edmunds opting to leave does also kind of suck. Congrats to the Eagles, they got a very serviceable safety. Bringing in Keanu Neal though, he's a very versatile piece, which we've seen the Steelers kind of tinker with Marcus Allen. And I think you can use his versatility considering Trey Norwood and DeMonte Casey are both there. I think it's a step down talent-wise, but I also think it opens up the books just a tad bit, and I'm not overly concerned about it considering Minkah Fitzpatrick is still in the secondary, the superstar, one of the best safeties in football himself. Dropping on down to the linebacker group though, the Steelers lost Devin Bush and Miles Jack. They lost Devin Bush to free agency after not picking up his 5th-year option, and they would end up cutting Miles Jack 1 year into a 2-year contract. But they would end up picking up Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts during the free agency period while drafting Nick Herbig. So, is this a fair trade-off? I think so, considering a poor inside linebacker group left and one came in. Now, Cole Holcomb entering the team on a 3-year, $18 million deal, coming off a season-ending foot injury, is fine, considering the way the Steelers set up their contracts is that it can be a 1-year rental if it does not work out. And Landon Roberts is fine. I don't think these guys are step downs from Miles Jack and Devin Bush. It's kind of hard to do that, but I don't think it's a step up in really any way. I think Cole Holcomb can provide a good service, but yeah, the inside linebacker group did not really improve, but Nick Herbig fell to the Steelers in round 4. The Wisconsin man had 11 sacks and 15.5 TFLs last season and was a 3rd-team All-American. The man knows how to play football. I'm excited to watch him come in, especially alongside another young inside linebacker that showed flashes at the end of last season in 7th-round pick Mark Robinson. I'm excited to see those two kind of fight Holcomb and Roberts for a starting spot. I for sure want to see that happen. I want to see the young guys take over so bad. And this is not a diss to Holcomb or Roberts. They're fine. Hey, they are going to be starting inside linebackers in the NFL. But it's not the hopeful thing that you want, considering how bad the inside linebacking core was last season. And let's drop on down to the D-line, because as the Steelers did not lose anything there, they definitely added someone in Keanu Benton. And I'm going to put it as simple as possible because I have the simplest scouting brain of all time. Keanu Benton, the same thing I said about Broderick Jones, can move men. He can move other grown men, and he has Cam Hayward alongside him to definitely help teach him, as Hayward is in the latter years of his career but still very efficient. And the Steelers also re-signed Larry Ogunjobi to a 3-year contract. I was so happy when I saw that. Thank God we re-signed Larry Ogunjobi, because we definitely needed more D-line help. That's why we brought in Keanu Benton. But if the Steelers were to lose Ogunjobi, more drastic measures would have to happen at D-tackle to improve. But ultimately, you'd probably just have to take a step down. And considering the Steelers' D-line the last few years, that's not the prettiest thing in the world. Now, this is a position the Steelers have been drafting for the last few years. In 2021, we saw the Steelers trade a 2022 4th-rounder for a 2021 5th-rounder to draft Isaiah Loudermilk. He hasn't really stepped up. Last year, in the 3rd round, we saw them draft DeMarvin Leal. And this year, during the 2nd round, we see them get Keanu Benton. A lot of young guys, but one needs to step up, and I think that's why Keanu Benton was brought in to play alongside Larry Ogunjobi and definitely Cam Hayward. So ultimately, from an offseason and defensive perspective, the Pittsburgh Steelers have been great for years, but lost some guys. And when you lose some starters for such a great defense, you gotta bring them back in now. And we saw that. Keanu Neal, Patrick Peterson, Joey Porter Jr., Cole Holcomb, Elandon Roberts, Keanu Benton. They brought in guys to step into those roles. Did they do enough to keep up that upper echelon defensive status? I think so. I don't think they lost a bunch of talent and got younger with Joey Porter Jr., Corey Trice, Nick Herbig, and Keanu Benton. I love it. I think the Steelers defense continues its domination. I want to talk about the Alex Highsmith contract situation. Move back up to the linebacker position and talk about the counterpart to TJ Watt, the man who had a breakout year. 14.5 sacks for Alex Highsmith? Are you shitting me? That's nuts. But let's talk about the contract, because he's entering the last year of his rookie deal right now, and I think there's a debate to be had on if this is the right move. Because if you re-sign Highsmith right now, probably going for around $13 million. Now, if you let it wait for one more year and he has another great season, it is going to be outpriced. And if I'm Alex Highsmith, there is a personal dilemma of, do I take this life-changing money now, or do I bet on myself for one more year? And if he bets on himself for one more year and his price gets way higher, he's gonna get franchise tagged. We saw it happen with Bud Dupree just a few years ago. He's gonna get franchise tagged if a deal is not reached this year. So I think we see 2 more seasons of Alex Highsmith, bare minimum. But contract-wise, if something were to happen right now, I think it happens for roughly $13 million per year, which I think is a great price for Alex Highsmith. And I would love to see it happen. But to play both sides, there is a team-building dilemma in the fact you're already paying TJ Watt insane amount of money, very worth it, one of the best defensive players on the damn planet. Of course that's worth it. But do you want to pay a guy another big sum of money to be a counterpart to him when you have big contracts coming up on the offensive side of the ball if some of these young stars do work out and become actual stars? There is a dilemma there in the cap management. Now, what I think happens and what I think is best for the Steelers, especially if the offensive side of the ball really takes off the way I want it to, what I think happens is Alex Highsmith plays this last season under his rookie deal without an extension and gets franchise tagged the next year as the Steelers try to find that other edge rushing piece to play alongside TJ Watt. Not because I want Alex Highsmith to leave, but because I ultimately think it's more important to kind of spread out your money throughout the positions the way that some successful teams have done and some successful teams haven't done it. Highsmith definitely has young talent, and if a $13 million per year contract extension were to break right now, as a Steelers fan, I'd be very happy. But there is a dilemma there, and what I think happens, and ultimately what I think is smartest, is you let him play out this last year, and then you franchise tag him next year. And boom, you have 2 more years of one of the best pass rushing duos in football. Bada bing, bada boom. I wanted to address that earlier during the video, but it didn't really fit in as I was recording. So yeah, after all of that, 30 minutes, after all of that, let's talk about the season expectations while looking at their schedule and finally answer the question, will the Steelers break through? And when I look at the Steelers' schedule, I don't see a hard one. And besides maybe the last 3 weeks of the season where they face the Bengals, Seahawks, and Ravens, I don't see a 3-game stretch that could all 3 be losses. Now, we don't know how the season is going to go come even October. Shit happens, things fly off the wall. We know that. But from the offseason standpoint, I don't see a tough schedule. I don't see a stretch of games where I'm like, oh shit. So given that fact, in the very hard AFC North and the very hard AFC in general, I personally believe the Steelers will have their breakthrough season with their young offensive core continuing to develop. The offensive line saw major improvements, and the defense, the superstars are there, the talent is there, and the necessary patchwork was done. And you face a schedule that does not have any rough goes like the first 6 to 7 weeks of the Steelers' schedule last season. That's all for me today. I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have their breakthrough season.